Shalom, everybody. This is Rukia Hadassah breaking in with some midday breaking news concerning the Notre Dame Cathedral, which is presently, as I do this recording, on fire in Paris, France. And I'm going to share some things with you all that I believe, as the story breaks, I began to have some feelings that this had a prophetic type of tone to it. Of course, anytime you see a news story breaking in this way, it is intended to draw attention. So, my first alert to this story, I was watching RT. I don't typically watch mainstream media like CNN or any of those channels because they're not talking about news. They're just talking about politics all day. So I'm not interested in politics. I really want to know what's going on in the world. And so RT for me right now is my best option, even though I'm not a fan of Russian television. I believe it is also slanted in their propaganda against our people, but I do find that their coverage is much broader than American mainstream television. So, as I'm watching this news report on RT earlier today, I noticed in the little news banner across the bottom, they put up a story about the Notre Dame Cathedral. And I looked and I was like, okay, church is burning. And all right, we lost three churches in Louisiana just a couple of days ago, or a few weeks ago, I guess. Several churches were set on fire in Louisiana. And so to me, I really initially wasn't intending to give it any more attention than I was able to give the other churches so much to look at. And so I was just going to, okay, well, it flashed another banner continuing the story. And if you watch RT, they usually just do one subject per banner scroll. So they don't continue the story in the banner unless it's pretty big. And so I saw like three mentions of this church burning, and that was my inclination that this is pretty big. And it dawned on me to go ahead and flip over to CNN, where I began to see, of course, coverage, ongoing, continual coverage of the fire, live coverage of the cathedral burning. Flipped over to Fox, flipped over to MSNBC. I'm like, oh, okay, they mean for us to know about this. So immediately, I'm this type of person. When I see something that I don't clearly understand and I have questions, I don't just sit on the questions. I start searching. So it dawned on me, first of all, to figure out what does Notre Dame mean. Break that word down. And found out that Notre Dame actually means Our Lady or Dear Mother. So that to me right there is like, well, what lady are you talking about? And that question is still in the air. What is compelling to me as I began to sort of peel back the layers of this top story, some very, very profound discoveries were made, at least by me, and I shared them with my daughter, who also was not aware of these things. So I'm going to do my best to quickly kind of, get your gears turning. Not here to do a full lesson or anything like that. My videos are strictly for perspective. It's not to teach anybody anything. It's not to compel anybody to believe what I believe. It's just for perspective. So here we go. This is concerning the Notre Dame Cathedral Fire currently burning in Paris. So my first objective, as I said, was to find out what does Notre Dame mean. And as I said, it means Our Lady, or uh, it means Dear Mother. So as I continue to, and you might hear my daughter chime in. She's more than welcome if she hears something. I don't care. I'm trying to get this information out to you all as quickly as possible. My next goal was to study the architecture. The architecture, of course, is going to immediately identify who built it. Different um, groups and or races or nations of people had different architecture styles, and I've studied the architecture styles of various people, and we all have. I mean, it's just kind of something, you could look at a building and go, you could probably tell something about the person who built it based upon what it's made of and how it's designed and things like that. So that's not something that you boast in if you know a little something about architecture. Now, the thing about this architecture for Notre Dame, the Notre Dame Cathedral, it was built by barbarians. Barbarians are the people who sacked Rome in 410 AD. Now, when you talk about the Romans being sacked, of course, we know that the Romans themselves sacked Israel in 70 AD. Well, their turn came around, and the Goths sacked their city in 410 AD. The Goths were people who flourished in Europe throughout ancient times and into the Middle Ages, and they're referred to at times as barbarians. They are famous for sacking the city of Rome, again, in 410 AD. Ironically, however, they are often credited with helping preserve Roman culture. After the sacking of Rome, a group of Goths moved to Gaul, which is in modern-day France, and Iberia, and formed the Visigothic kingdom. So now we're able to see the transition of the Goths into France and how they got there. So I'm not going to go too much further into this. I want to read one more paragraph of this news report, which I'm going to leave a link in the description box. Don't worry, you're going to be able to look at the very same thing that I'm reading from. I don't claim to know all this information. I literally just did a quick look up, had some questions like who built it. I understood immediately when I saw the story, there is a prophetic inference to this particular cathedral burning, and there's an inference to it burning when it's burning. Of course, they're getting ready to celebrate. They're in the middle of their Holy Week, or starting their Holy Week, and it's supposed to culminate in Easter Sunday. And we all know, as an awakened people, we do not do Easter. We do not celebrate Easter, and so we're not participating in those events. So I got an eyeful as I began to research, and I just had to share this. My daughter was emphatic. She's like, "Mom, you've got to do a video. You've got to do a video." So again, trying to keep this very brief, but I just found a few breadcrumbs, found a few dots, started to connect them, drew a theory. I'm not saying this is what's happening, but as I conclude, you'll see where I'm going with this. So, in continuing with this article, ironically, however, they are often credited with helping preserve Roman culture. After the sacking of Rome, a group of Goths moved to Gaul in modern-day France and Iberia and formed the Visigothic kingdom. This kingdom would eventually incorporate Catholic Christianity. Roman artistic traditions and other aspects of Roman culture. The last Gothic kingdom fell to the Moors in 711 AD. So, there we go. The Moors, as we all know, and I have no idea if these were Israelite Moors or if these were Islamic Moors. There are two kinds of Moors, at least that I know of. And so I haven't done the research yet, but I do know Moors. Of course, we know the Moors from historical documentation were largely black. And in 711 AD, they took down the last Gothic kingdom. It fell to the Moors in 711 AD. So now, as I get this information, I began to study, of course, the building itself. And I remember, of course, if you know the movie The Hunchback of Notre Dame is based on this actual cathedral. And in the movie, there are gargoyles all over the building. And I thought, wow, this place is just, people are mourning it. They're crying, and they're gathering to watch it burn. Everybody's just, oh, so disturbed and troubled and saddened and horrified by the destruction of this building. However, I wanted to understand more about why there was so much. I mean, I'm as much of a historian as anybody. I was familiar with the cathedral in literature and other parts of history, but I had not taken the time to dig in and see what's the significance of this cathedral and why its burning is requiring ongoing, continual coverage without ceasing as we watch it burn on worldwide TV. So that was the question I was trying to answer. And so here are some of the answers that the Ruach HaKodesh led me to as I began to sort of try to peel back some of these layers. So the historical significance of the building uh, is what I was trying to learn more about. And I wanted to understand, like, what is a gargoyle? And why is there a need to have gargoyles plastered all over the building? And I learned two things about the gargoyles. Number one, they're supposedly, they have a practical use, which is uh, they serve in rainwater collection. Now, I don't know why you have to have a grotesque statue attached to a church to collect rainwater, but that's supposedly the practical use of a gargoyle. Now, there's also a less practical use. It's more of a marketing tool, I understand. The marketing tool of the gargoyle was to basically compel those of the churchgoers who were members of the church, I guess, to come into the church because the evil lurked outside the church. That's why the gargoyles were on the church, to show you that evil is outside the church and salvation is inside the church. So you're supposed to come to church so that you can be saved from the evil that's outside the church. And these evil creatures are supposedly menacing them because these are the creatures that they're going to see in hell. I'm sorry, y'all, but some of this stuff is laughable, and it is clearly an indication of how easily we can fall prey to deceptions. And that's why Yahweh Shah, I'm sure, told us repeatedly, do not be deceived, do not be deceived, do not be deceived. And now we're understanding why. Because so much of what they've done over the years has been for the specific purpose and intention of deceiving us. So now, as this fire is raging and destroying this entire structure, it's over 850 years old, and it's at the beginning of their so-called Holy Week, and now all of a sudden there's this destructive force that's consuming this building that is a monstrosity covered in demonic idols and creatures. But as I began to search even deeper, I found even more interesting facts about this. Now, this is just something to wetten your whistle, if you will, something to sort of prime your palate for this information. You all can go and do additional research, and there's a lot more out there about this, I know. I'm just giving you the high points, and then I've got to be on my way. So here's the next point I need to bring out, and then I'm going to wrap it up. They began in the middle of the story that they're telling as they're broadcasting the emergency story about this cathedral burning. They began talking about the relics and the artifacts and the art that is contained within these churches. And of course, I'm very familiar with a lot of the the things that have been said with regards to the Vatican holding a lot of precious treasuries and treasures connected to the Israelite people. And so I was interested to know whether or not that anything of that sort was contained in this church, because the fire seems to be so urgently reported. Clearly, if it's connected to the Roman Catholic Church, there has to be some element of something valuable in this church that we probably need to pay attention to. And lo and behold, as my research continued, I determined from another article whose link I will also provide in the description box below. We've learned that some of the torturous devices used in the crucifixion of Yahushua HaMashiach are contained in this cathedral. That's right. That means that there are artifacts and items contained within this church or this cathedral that literally have the DNA of Hamashiach. Let's be clear. Now that's where things kind of went kablam, and it all started to fall into place. Now I can't say it all fell into place, because on the outskirts, as you see the story unfold, you're kind of rejoicing because you see this horrific monstrosity of a building that was built off of the suffering and maintained off of the suffering of our people. And they actually have devices of torture that were used in the crucifixion of Hamashiach contained in that building. Of particular interest to them, apparently, is the crown of thorns that was placed upon his head. And as I learned this information, I began to think, well, that makes sense. Because, of course, the Roman soldiers would collect these torturous items and use them. I mean, if they cast lots for his clothing, certainly the crown of thorns and the cross, or the board that they nailed his hands into, that would also be of particular interest. I'm sure they've got the nails somewhere. I'm sure they've got the spear that pierced his side somewhere. So these things I am sure of. I mean, especially when you find out, I mean, a crown of thorns. I mean, it was just something somebody picked up and said, hey, oh, I mean, it was really spontaneous in how the crown of thorns thing even happened, because somebody just said, oh, he's the king of the Jews. Well, let's give him a crown. And so somebody being funny decided to make a crown of thorns. This wasn't something that they just planned for him to have on his head. He was being mocked, okay? He was being persecuted. He was being spit upon. And so they were finding every way possible to humiliate him. Now, when his body was finally taken down off of the cross, the disciples, his followers, his mother and brothers who came to gather his body, they wouldn't have had any use for a crown of thorns. They would have taken that thing and tossed it, if they ever had it in their hands to begin with. They would have been like, get this off of him, and they would have surely, just picturing myself in that state of mind, it would not have dawned on me to save or preserve a crown of thorns. So surely, if they ever had it at all, it got pitched. And so what are the Roman soldiers doing? They're picking up artifacts. They cast lots for his clothes. They've done all of these things because even back then, it's going to be about money. So I'm saying all that to let you know. I'm going to read this particular article found on a website called The Compass. It's the official newspaper for the Catholic Diocese of Green Bay, Wisconsin. But what's interesting about this is that in this article it says, the crown of thorns is depicted in various ways in art, from a band with rose plant-like thorns to a full cap of spikes of several inches in length. But what was it really, and where did it end up? After the crown appears in the Gospels, Matthew 27:29, Mark 15:17, and John 19:2, it is not mentioned again in any writings for more than 400 years. In 1918, Catholic Encyclopedia notes that the crown of thorns was not spoken of as a relic, even by St. Helen, who journeyed to Jerusalem to found Christ's true cross in the early 4th century, or St. Jerome, who lived in Jerusalem in the early 5th century. The earliest mention seems to have been by St. Paulinus of Nola, who mentioned veneration of the crown of thorns in Jerusalem in 409 AD. I'm not going to read this entire article, but here's where things get interesting. In 1238, the crown of thorns appears as part of a deal proposed by Baldwin II, the Latin emperor of Byzantium, who was in desperate need of cash at the time. King Louis IX of France arranged to purchase the crown of thorns from Baldwin, but he actually received it from the bankers in Venice who had already advanced the funds to Baldwin. I'm going to back up. I skipped over a paragraph because I wanted you to understand that transactions took place. Going back to this previous paragraph, what we know today as Christ's crown of thorns can be unbrokenly traced back only to Constantinople, where many of the church's treasures originally in Jerusalem, were transferred to the Byzantine Empire between the 4th and the 10th centuries. So much of these artifacts, relics, things that were used to torture and crucify and carry out the deaths of Israelites, particularly Hamashiach, were preserved. Now, why wouldn't they have these things? When you think about it, doesn't it make sense that they would have these devices of torture? That's like, I mean, why wouldn't the murderer have the murder weapon? Like, these are not things that we would have, but clearly these items and artifacts that were used to crucify Hamashiach, they have been right here on the planet in their possession. They are the ones that have had this stuff, not us. So now you're left to wonder as you see these things unfolding, what's really going on? Well, let's read on. So after Baldwin makes the transaction and he's able to sell the crown of thorns to King Louis IX of France, listen to what happens next. On August 19th of 1239, the relic of the crown of thorns arrived in Paris. Louis, a devout man who would later be canonized as Saint Louis of France, we say in the state St. Louis of France, took off his own crown. Okay, this is the king of France, King Louis IX, takes off his own crown and his royal robes to walk barefoot behind the relic as it was carried to the unfinished Sainte-Chapelle, the chapel of the French kings. That chapel was completed in 1248 and then housed Louis's collection of Passion relics, of which the crown was the premier. So basically, the crown that was on Hamashiach's head when he was crucified was the premier piece of all of these so-called Passion relics that he had in his possession. There's even a relics of the Passion stained glass window in the chapel. During the stay in the Sainte-Chapelle, several of the crown's thorns were removed and presented as gifts from the kings of France to important figures of their times. This included Mary, Queen of Scots, who had been Queen Consort of France in 1559 to 1560. She married Francis II, who reigned for about a year. When Francis died, okay, so Mary, Queen of Scots, married Francis II, and when he died, Mary returned to Scotland, taking this holy thorn with her. After her execution, the thorn was given to Thomas Percy, her servant, and his daughter, Elizabeth Woodruff. Elizabeth later gave the thorn to a Jesuit priest. I don't know if I believe that or not, but okay, that's the way they're going to tell it. She gave the thorn to a Jesuit priest who presented it to the Jesuit Stonyhurst College. See how these people keep popping up? The Roman Catholic Church keeps popping up, and they're connected to the things that murdered, tortured, injured, hurt, harmed, and exploited our people. You've got to start making this connection now. We can't keep allowing these things to unfold and we're not paying attention. They have these things in their possessions. When you play a game of Clue, you're looking for the person who's got the murder weapon, right? You're looking for the person who's got the murder weapon. Who started this? Who lied? Who cheated? Who had the motive? So, again, just trying to get the gears turning for some of us out here today. So when Frances died, Mary had returned to Scotland. She took the thorn with her. She died. She was executed. And her servant, Thomas Percy, not sure who that is. He had a daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth gave it to a Jesuit priest. Jesuit priest gave it to Jesuit Stonyhurst College. And that's where it's been ever since. It is placed in a college. Now, that's just one thorn. That's not the whole crown. And it's placed in the college chapel during Holy Week. The thorn is housed in a reliquary with a string of Mary's pearls surrounding. So basically, they've taken the thorn, the murder weapon, part of the murder weapon, or not the murder weapon, but a torture device, and they basically idolized. They've elevated it to idol status. And they take the thorn and they surround it with a string of Mary's pearls, and this is supposed to be looked at with reverence, not with disgust, not with horror. Like, why would you be sitting here displaying the thorns as something holy? This is the nuttiness of religion, organized religion in particular. So now, moving on, when the French Revolution occurred in the 18th century, many relics and treasures of the church were lost. However, Napoleon saved the crown of thorns, and it was kept at the National Library until 1804. At that time, Christ's crown and was returned to the archbishops of Paris. And in August 10th, 1806, was placed in the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris. That is the building that is currently burning. That is the building that everyone is mourning the loss of. These gargoyles, the steeple with the cross on it, and all of these things. You see, the Roman Catholic Church has taken these torture devices and used them and to basically turn these torture devices into idol status. They want you to worship the cross. They want you to worship the crown. But these are things they created. You understand? The cross is what the Romans created to kill Hamashiach. Why am I worshiping a cross? That's their invention of torture. Why am I worshiping a crown? That's their invention of torture. I'm worshiping the Lord of Lords. I'm worshiping the King of Kings. I'm worshiping Hamashiach. I'm not worshiping Hamashiach, but I understand who he is in his holiness. You understand? So he did tell us, do not worship him. So I don't want anybody to come back and, oh, you don't worship him. I know. I'm just saying. I used worship because they have allowed and influenced and encouraged people to worship items. And so, transversely, when we start thinking about what they've done, no, we don't worship Hamashiach. I don't want anybody thinking I believe that. But the worship is to the Father for a Savior, for a Redeemer. Thank you for delivering Israel through the blood of Hamashiach, of which is on and contained in these items. So you might be left with a question, which I don't know if it's anything that I really need to know the answer to or not. But, the Father will reveal in time. He will reveal. So here's where we think we should be at right now. Either the Father decided it was time to destroy this item and destroy this building and destroy this idolatry, or they said, uh-oh, They're getting close to the truth. His DNA is on these thorns and these crowns, and his DNA is on a lot of these other artifacts that, if it comes down to it, they're going to be able to prove that they are not the ones who are the true descendants. We're going to be able to prove that the people claiming to be the true descendants are not the true descendants. That's what I believe could be a plausible reason. Like I said, I'm not telling anybody to draw any conclusions. But to conclude this broadcast, let me just wrap up right now. So, as of August 10th, 1806, the crown of thorns that had been on Hamashiach's head was placed in the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris. Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris, as us Americans or Americanized speakers would say. So by this time, the crown had lost all its original thorns. No, I think they're trying to say lost. Says by this time the crown had lost, I believe, it says last, but I think it's trying to say lost all its original thorns. It now consists of a bundle of reeds bound together by gold wire to symbolize the lost thorn. Now, where the thorns go? Where the thorns go? There's speculation that the original band of reeds of Christ's crown was held together by a thorny vine. According to the website of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in 1896, a goldsmith, using an architect's design, fashioned by a circular container made of crystal and gold to place over the relic. There's also an entwining branch of shrub, similar to that which most scholars believe to have been used for the crown of thorns by the Roman soldiers around the relic. Known botanically as Ziziphus spina Christi, the plant is more popularly called the jujube tree. Today, the relic of the crown of thorns is publicly displayed in the Notre Dame Cathedral every Friday of Lent from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and all day on Good Friday. During the rest of the year, the crown of thorns is placed out for veneration at 3 p.m. on the first Fridays of each month. At other times, it is kept in the cathedral's treasury. The Knights of the Holy Sepulchre have been entrusted as its guardian. So, I guess the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre is the equivalent of the Secret Service for the president. And so, I presume, I'm not saying that they are, I just have to make presumptions sometimes. I don't need all the nooks and crannies filled in order for me to sort of make some, to deduce certain outcomes or certain answers. So here's where we're at, folks. Family, loved ones, beloved. Listen, something's going on. Don't know what it is, but I'm offering food for thought. Again, food for thought. This means this increases your ability to think in a different way, to use perspective and not just nail down and have to have this is it, this is not, this is the way it is, and nobody else can be right but me. No, I am not doing that. That's not what I'm here for. So I want people to begin to hopefully understand that there's a lot going on. We're seeing things happen prophetically around the world. And like I said, when I saw this story, immediately it rang as having a prophetic inference. At first, I promise you, could have cared less. I was just ready to rejoice and say, "Hey, it's gone." This building of idols. I don't know anything about the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Okay, I don't know the Roman Catholic lifestyle and and all of the hierarchies and the cathedrals and all of that stuff. I just look at it as wicked. Okay, so there's a whole lot more research to do, and I know that if you all begin to dig and look for more information, I would strongly suggest that you all do more research on the barbarians and their connection to the Roman Catholic religion, as it were, if you haven't already done that. And just basically, it kind of I'm getting a lot more perspective from looking up these different people who interacted with us, interacted with the various people that were in the same areas as we were. So please, if you have an opportunity, take your time and research some of these stories that are going on. If you have a feeling that something prophetic is happening, then look into it. Do a little research, a little Google search. It's not going to hurt you. Just take an opportunity to show your effort to look up some of these things, because you'll be amazed at how much more understanding you'll get. So with that, I pray that you all have a little bit more of an understanding. Take your time, research, ask questions. Don't let them continue to tell you these lies and stories. Look up the information for yourself. I pray that you all continue to seek the Father's face and allow Him to be a support and a power and a strength to you as we are entering into some very, very difficult and precarious times. I love you all, and I'm praying for your strength and continued enlightenment. Hallelujah to the Father. And I pray that the Holy Spirit keep you, and we are waiting for the soon return of our Savior, Yahweh Shai HaMashiach. Hallelujah.